1. You know, this book has taken me some time to get my head around. But I can honestly say that this week I have genuinely God has given me a spirit of excitement about this book and our study of it. And I hope it is for you as well. And so to spare you from going on the journey that I went on this week with reading introductions to the book and all this kind of stuff, I thought for our purposes of studying the book, it might be just advantageous to see what this book is all about just by diving in. Because of the way the writer introduces his book and introduces himself, and some of the first things he says gives us some great introduction to the book. So let's go ahead and look at verse 1 there in Ecclesiastes. The words of the preacher, the son of David, king in Jerusalem. You know, there's a big debate. There's a big discussion on who this is. What we're going to find through the teaching of this book is that there's apparently two voices that are happening. There is one that is more like an editor of someone's words. And then there is one called the preacher who said the words. Now, a lot of folks believe that this is Solomon, King Solomon. At the end of his life, he's looking back on his life. He's looking back on his words, his thoughts, his search for meaning in life. He's editing some of his thoughts, and so the two voices that we hear are actually Solomon. It's Solomon in his search earlier in life, but now it's Solomon later in life. Some say maybe near death as he reflects on his life. And so he's editing himself. Some think about that. That is a very, very natural and likely reading of this book, but there are others who think that there's someone, it's an editor, someone we don't know, that is reporting the words of a very wise man that learned a lot. That would most likely be Solomon. And so this editor is reporting this very wise man's words, what this wise man either said or would have said, adding the editor's own comments at different times. Now, I'll save you all of this because it's hard to get into and you can do your own study. There are great cases for both. There are great cases for both. But both are speculation at best. But the good thing is that neither of these views affects the teaching of the book. J.I. Packer says this: whether Solomon himself was the preacher in the presented here in Ecclesiastes, whether Solomon himself was the preacher or that the preacher puts his sermon into Solomon's mouth as a didactic device, need not concern us. The sermon is certainly Solomonic in the sense that it teaches lessons which Solomon had unique opportunities to learn. Okay, so let's jump into it. Starting in verse 2, it goes all the way through the end of this chapter. And what you're going to see, what you need to understand is this first chapter is really an introduction, a general introduction to the rest of the book. Okay, so we're not going to get into a lot of details this morning about the search that the preacher went on. But chapter 1 is really an introduction to the book. He says this, he starts off his thesis statement of sorts. Verses 2 and 3. Vanity of vanities, says the preacher. Vanity of vanities, all is vanity. What does a man gain by all the toil at which he toils under the sun? This word vanity is a Hebrew word hevel. Okay, it's a hard word to describe, but it has a lot of different. It's kind of like a diamond that has all kind of it has different facets of meaning, and depending on the context with which it's used, and it'll be used in a lot of different contexts in the book, we'll see, it carries a different flavor of meaning. But basically it could be like a breath, vanity, hevel. It's like a breath. You see it and then it's gone, or like a vapor. Or I heard J.D. Greer describe it as it's like a cloud. You know, he talked about the time that the first time he went in an airplane, And he went up through the clouds, and he was like, what? This is all there was? Because from down here, it looks like they're fluffy, and you can roll around on them and jump on them and have fun, and 5 little monkeys jumping on the cloud, kind of thing. But you go up there and you realize they're just nothing. You just pass right through. So the context is going to determine the meaning. I've heard it also described like soap bubbles. Soap bubbles, Stephanie will get the Dawn dish detergent, and she'll do it like that, and bubbles will fly all over the kitchen, and the boys love it. And they're fun to chase around, and if you get one big enough, you can see the different colors of it, and they all dance around, and they're fun, but all of a sudden, if you try to catch one, what happens? It's gone. Vanity. So the context is going to determine the meaning. In some senses, it's going to mean vain or meaningless, futile. Sometimes it means absurd, like that makes absolutely no sense. It might mean unreliable. We're going to see that it means frail or fleeting or pointless or worthless. In some contexts, it's going to mean enigmatic, confusing, frustrating, maddening, sorrowful. As we dive into the book, we'll kind of talk about what each one means in the context that it's being used. But he says vanity of vanities. He says hevel of hevels. This is the superlative meaning. It means that this is, it's like holy of holies. You remember in the scripture, the holy of holies? It was the most holy place, or the Song of Songs. I think the book right after Ecclesiastes, it's the greatest song that Solomon ever wrote. We might say the best of the best. Vanity of vanities, he's saying, there's nothing more utterly meaningless than everything under the sun. It's a bit depressing this morning. Hevel of hevels. And so he talks about under the sun. Verse 3, what does a man gain by all the toil at which he toils under the sun? He looks at life under the sun, and he says, if we are looking at a life under the sun, the earthly, from ground level, without a regard for God, with everything that is on this earth and everything that we have to indulge ourselves in on the earth, or any meaning we try to find from anything on the earth, without a regard for God, it's utterly meaningless. So when he says under the sun, he is talking about a view from the earth with really no regard for God or no interaction with God. He's looking at an earth that has been cursed, that is imperfect, that has come from the fall of man. And so I want to turn to Romans chapter 8. Thank you, Lord. There it is right there. Romans chapter 8, starting in verse 20. Paul picks up on this idea. Some say that he was really thinking about Ecclesiastes here when he said this. Listen to what Paul said in Romans chapter 8, verse 20. For the creation was subjected to futility. There's that word futility. For the creation was subjected to futility, not willingly, but because of him who subjected it, in hope that creation itself will be set free from its bondage to corruption and obtain the freedom of the glory of the children of God. For we know that the whole creation has been groaning together in the pains of childbirth until now. And not only the creation, but we ourselves, who have the first fruits of the Spirit, groan inwardly as we wait eagerly for adoption as sons, the redemption of our bodies. And so what is Paul saying? He's saying this, that the earth, since the fall, has been cursed. Creation itself is groaning because creation is not like it should be. That we even ourselves are groaning for something better than this life that we see under the sun. Because everything we see under the sun is utterly meaningless and cannot give us satisfaction in life. No matter what we go for, wisdom, pleasures, money, whatever it is, nothing under the sun can give ultimate meaning in life and ultimate satisfaction. And it's because of an earth and an existence and a humanity that has been cursed after the fall. It's incomplete. Sin has messed everything up. Eswine, I'm really loving this book that I've gotten on Ecclesiastes. He says this. He says, what God created and purposed in Eden was legitimate and original good To lose this good is pain. There are things worth crying about. This world has lost what it was supposed to be like, and as a result, there's pain, there's corruption, there's evil, there's hardship, there's sin. It's painful, it's sorrowful, it's hard, it's meaningless, and it can't meet the deep meaning of our souls. Nothing. Not even the greatest gifts that God has given on this earth. Though we were meant to enjoy them, we were never meant to worship them and find our satisfaction in them. Because if we do, we find that life is utterly meaningless. So Ecclesiastes is a book of reality that deals with real life under the sun and the futility of it without a God beyond the sun. I want to read this to you. This sums up my thoughts better than I could. The preacher sought meaning and answers in everything in life under the sun, but nothing gave true gain, true meaning, true satisfaction to life. He went after pleasures. He went after money. He went after wisdom. He went after work and other things. This post-fall world and humanity offered him no ultimate meaning and purpose. The earth was created good, and the gifts that God gave were to be enjoyed as being from Him, causing us to worship Him. But after the fall and the curse that followed, nothing is as it should be. All are sinners, and sin permeates our existence. Now, we worship the gift more than the giver. Danny Aiken says this: we turn them, talking about the gifts of God, we turn them into ends rather than means. We sought to find satisfaction in the created things rather than the Creator God. End quote. Gifts become perverted, and we create idols out of them in the place of God. Like the preacher, we search for satisfaction in the things of this world. We look for satisfaction in relationships, family, success, money, power, possessions, leisure, accomplishments, experiences, vacations, prominence, good health, even religion or influence, reputation, politics, romance, entertainment, sex, substance, sports, nostalgia, prosperity, jobs, so much more. We're searching for satisfaction in all these things, but they don't bring the satisfaction that we were created for. So, to break up the monotony of life, the meaninglessness, the cycle that we're on of searching for meaning in life, and somehow have a sense of satisfaction and meaning, these things and more are often what we look to. We make them idols, and because they are meaningless, it's a fool's errand. In them alone, there is nothing but vanity and meaninglessness, because they are fleeting. Now, in a post-fall cursed existence, life under the sun is filled with disease, death, and evil. Life and work is toilsome and it's hard. Injustice abounds. Confusion about life without neat and tidy equation guarantees frustrates our mind and challenges our logic and sense of justice. What I mean by this is we think that if we do this and do this and do this and do this, then this should happen. That A plus B plus C plus D equals Y. And we think that if we do this for God and do exactly what God wants us to do and all these little things, that we should get a product that is a fail-safe guarantee. And that's not the case in this world. The righteous do good and evil happens to them. The unrighteous do evil and good things happen to them under the sun. There is no rhyme or reason to this world that we can bank on under the sun, that we can bank on and say, if I do this and I do this and I do this and I do this, then God's going to give me this, or that this is going to happen. There's frustrations and challenges to our logic and our sense of justice. We die. And if you're looking for meaning solely in life under the sun, in a post-Genesis 3 world, it's only meaningless, futile, fleeting, unsatisfying, absurd, confusing, and frustrating. Zach S. Wine says, he's a master of illustration, and he says that it's like going to a shoe store to get medicine. The shoe store has good things and things that are nice and good, but it's not what we need. The shoe store is not going to get us the medicine to cure our ailing hearts or sickness or whatever it is. And so we look for things under the sun to fill a need that the things under the sun can't fill. Mark Dever said Job in the Bible learned about the vanity of this world by losing it all. The preacher in Ecclesiastes saw the vanity of this world by having it all. No matter how much you have, it doesn't satisfy. Now, I just want to make a little note here. What we're going to see with this preacher, whether it's Solomon, I'll call him Solomon just because it's easier to do that. What we're going to see with Solomon is that he goes on a journey, listen church, that most of us are not willing to go on. He goes on a journey that most of us are scared to death to go on. He goes looking for satisfaction in things that anything he could give his heart and his mind to. If this was Solomon who wrote this, that God gave great wisdom to, he had a capacity to see things in a way that most people could never see. And he had resources to go get whatever he wanted to get to give himself pleasure and meaning and satisfaction. And he went on a journey to find meaning in life, and most of us aren't willing to do that. Here's what most of us like to do. Most of us want to stay at a superficial level of life. We don't want to go dig to see if these things that we're really giving our life to, even if they're the good gifts of God, if they really are giving us meaning and value to our life. But he says, no, I want to go search to see if any of this stuff under the sun is gonna give me meaning and value. And what he finds out is that it's meaningless. And I think if we ask that same question, you're going to come to the same conclusion as the preacher here. But most of us don't like that conclusion because it's depressing. It makes us change our life. It makes us change our focus. And so we want to live at a superficial level of life, pretending that the things under the sun satisfy when they really, really don't. Again, Mark Dever says this: the world is a bad place for your final investment. It was not made for that. As long as you keep trying to cobble together meaning from the scraps of this world, the teacher of Ecclesiastes will pursue you and point out the paltry and passing, flimsy and fleeting nature of your materials. There is more to life than what we find under the sun, and God has not made us to be satisfied with this world alone. As the teacher says in chapter 3, verse 11, God has set eternity in our hearts. Yes, our lives are lived out under the sun, but our hearts' desires stretch infinitely beyond the horizon. Eternity goes beyond the sphere of what is under this sun. And so, what the preacher is going to do here is in chapter 1, he's going to give us some examples of nature. He's going to start to flesh this out for us in verses 4 through 8. I'll just read verse 4. A generation goes and a generation comes, but the earth remains forever. And then he starts to go into, the sun. Now, we know we orbit the sun, but from the Earth's vantage point, the sun rises and it sets and just keeps going around and around. He talks about the wind going around and around and not getting anywhere. The sun going around and around, not getting anywhere. Streams flowing to the ocean, but the seas are never filled, and so there's not satisfaction, and they just keep going to the same place, and there's no gain, there's no profit, there's no advancement, there's no progress made. It's just a constant circle and a constant cycle and a constant tiring, wearisome event. But what's so interesting here in verse 4 is he says that a generation goes and a generation comes, but the earth remains forever. And so people come, people go, people are born, people die, but these monotonous repetitions of the earth, they stay forever, and the earth abides forever. Your life is fleeting. The earth has been around since the beginning of creation. I was reading this book, and Steph was sitting beside me, and I was like, oh gosh, Steph, check this out. You know, the same sun that we look at, Adam and Eve saw. How many generations have come and gone and seen that sun that nobody remembers anymore? The meaningless of life under the sun without God. We're just passing through, but the earth abides forever. These cycles continue unchanged. And part of the picture, I think, here of the constant cycles of nature is this, is that there's a bunch of activity, there's a bunch of wearisome cycles, tiring cycles, but there's no progress, there's no gain. This post-fallen world, even creation is tired, I think the writer is trying to tell us here. And so why would we look to the things of this earth which are groaning with us for ultimate satisfaction? We can't. So this monotony of life under the sun is repetitious. There's no real change, there's no real gain, and there's no real ultimate satisfaction. So this is to remind us that our lives, too, are circular. They're monotonous. They're repetitions under the sun. And there's no real gain to our life under the sun. I'll give you a few examples. It's summertime, and it's not as much the case now because it hasn't rained in a while. But you cut your grass, and when I cut my grass, there is such an incredible sense of satisfaction because it looks nice when it's edged. I just go and I take a shower and I sit down. And it's like, man. But then, what? 3-4 days later. It's like, where's that sense of satisfaction? Because here it comes sprouting up again, right? It's the cycle. And so you have to find that satisfaction in cutting the grass again and doing it again. Or, for crying out loud, fingernails and toenails. I mean, what in the world? I can't stand clipping my nails. I just don't like it. But when I clip them, it's like, finally got that done. But then here it comes again. You know, you got to clip them again. That paycheck. You work hard, you get that paycheck, you look at the balance, and it's like, whew, I got enough to make payments, and then all those payments go out, and it's like, whew, I don't have enough to make the next month's payments, and so that needs to happen again. Cycles, repetition. My poor wife, laundry. Yesterday, she got done all the laundry, and she felt so good about it. But my poor wife, what she doesn't understand, don't tell her. She's not in here, so don't tell her. Right here. But come like 3 or 4 days, that sense of satisfaction doing the laundry is going to be gone again because it's going to be piled up to the light bulbs on the ceiling again. There's temporary satisfaction only to repeat, wash, rinse, repeat. Right? This circular repetition of life is tiring beyond words. There's joy in it if it leads us to the Creator, but if we're trying to find our joy in the things of this world, it's tiring and it's wearisome. And I think sometimes we long for changes in our circumstances only really because it's tiresome and wearisome. And then we get those changes in circumstances, and then those circumstances are tiresome and wearisome, and we want to get more. I read something with S.Y. here last night. He said, you know, it's like two lovers who hold hands for the first time. And for that first 2 days, holding hands is just the greatest thing ever. But then eventually holding hands doesn't satisfy, and they want more. That's what changes in circumstances are. So, you know, be a go-getter, but I don't think being a go-getter is always a compliment. Because sometimes being a go-getter is really saying, I really want to go get something to satisfy me because this isn't satisfying me anymore. And what you're going to get is really meaningless and vanity if we're seeking it apart from the Lord and not using it to worship the Lord. We're seeking ultimate satisfaction in it. So, verse 8, he says, nothing satisfies. It says, all things are full of weariness. A man cannot utter it. The eye is not satisfied with seeing, nor the ear filled with hearing. Nature isn't satisfied. It keeps going around and around and around. Nothing under the sun will satisfy. I thought about my sermon preparation this week. I worked really hard to try to get my head around Ecclesiastes, and there's always this time in the week that I look forward to, because when I feel like I've got a good handle on the Scripture, and I got my notes prepared, and I get it all uploaded where it needs to be, and all that kind of thing, where it's ready to go, where all I have to do is pull it out and preach it that Sunday morning. When I get to that point, there is a sense of satisfaction. Because hopefully I get that done on Thursday. Sometimes it goes into Friday or Saturday. But when I finally get that done, whether it's 2 days or whether it's 2 hours, I get that time where it's buttoned up, it's done, and I get that time with my family. And I love time with my family and this behind me ready to go for Sunday. And so I look forward to that time. And there's that satisfaction when everything's buttoned up. I get time with Steph and Joshua and Joseph. But then, that time wears away, Sunday morning comes, I get to preach, and I love it, and then Sunday afternoon happens, and it's okay. Got to start thinking about that, and I'm looking forward to that next time. You know, I'm studying the Word, I love it, but when I'm looking forward to that next time, that I can really just have it all behind me, and I can spend time with my family. Now, on the flip side, I'm spending time with my family, and it's great, and then it has to come up again. But then, so there's really no ultimate satisfaction even in this. But then if I get a lot of time with my family, crying out loud, you need a break from them sometimes. And so even that isn't ultimately satisfying. We go on vacations, but vacations end. We work to maintain our bodies. But they get old and they die. I'm not saying don't try to be healthy, but I'm saying we work hard to find meaning in things, and they ultimately fail us. Money, buying things. You work hard to make money. You get money so you can buy things. Then you got to fix those things. You got to maintain those things. You got to spend time on those things. And then those things aren't enough, so you need more money. It's just a constant cycle. Now, it's not that there isn't temporary satisfaction with the good gifts of God, but there's no eternal satisfaction in them. The preposition, I guess, is that a preposition? With and in? Is that right? Okay. So there is temporary satisfaction with the good gifts of God, but there's no eternal satisfaction in them. Barrick says, the preacher here is searching for a sense of satisfaction that's deeper and more lasting than just what his senses are capable of perceiving. The eyes and the ears not being filled. So the preacher here intends us to lose our taste for meaning in this world and to hunger for something deeper. So let's run through some of these verses here. Verses 9 and 10, he says that nothing is new. Nothing is new under the sun. The sobering reality is that humanity's basic existence hasn't changed, and it will not. When he says nothing is new, he's not talking about, technology, right? So I'm preaching from an iPad up here. It was a gift to me. All right. So the Apostle Paul didn't preach from an iPad. The iPad is new. What he's trying to say is there have been advancements, but what he's trying to say is that the search for meaning under the sun has not changed since the beginning. Nothing new has filled life with new meaning under the sun. The more, you've heard this, the more things change, what? The more they stay the same. Again, Barrick says, the vast majority of events are merely repetitions in a slightly different costume. So if there's anything new, it has to come from beyond the sun and not under the sun. In verse 11, he says that nothing is remembered. Nothing is remembered. No one is remembered. Another sobering reality is that most people and what they do aren't remembered. What you do is forgotten. And if it's remembered by anybody, when they die, it's forgotten. Memories die with the ones who have the memories. So what you do is forgotten in the sense of it changing really future actions. Even those that we remember that have long, long gone, that have been written about in history books, we don't know them personally, one, and we don't know them completely, two. And if you are remembered, like maybe one of these folks, it doesn't benefit you because you are dead. S1 says, toiling among fading peoples and times in order to make our lives count is fruitless. And then in verses 12 through 18, the preacher says this. He says wisdom doesn't even help this big dilemma, this search for meaning under the sun. Wisdom doesn't help. As a matter of fact, we're going to see that wisdom makes him more sorrowful and confused. So the preacher's exhaustive search to find meaning in all that is done under heaven reveals this. His great wisdom can't fix any meaning to anything, and it can't fix the world. He can't find any meaning to anything, and it can't fix the world. So look at verse let me find it right quick. Verse 17. And I applied my heart to know wisdom, and to know madness and folly. I perceived this also is but a what? Some of your versions may say chasing after the wind. My version says striving after the wind. The picture here is if you want to try to figure out life, figure out the equations of life, find satisfaction in life under the sun, if you want that, it's like chasing the wind. It's like going outside and trying to grab the wind, put it in your pocket, and take it home. You can't do it. It's meaningless. As a matter of fact, I read somebody that said, I think it was DeBrew, I think he said that chasing the wind makes a dog chasing its tail look brilliant. So in his exhaustive search to find meaning in all that's done under heaven reveals that his great wisdom can't figure it all out, and it can't fix anything in this post-fall world. It also shows that the frustrations of life have been ordained by God. Look what he says. He says in verse 13, and I applied my heart to seek and to search out by wisdom all that is done under heaven. It is an unhappy business that God has given to the children of man to be busy with. These frustrations of life and not able to find meaning in life under the sun has been given to us by God. He cursed the earth, and He made the earth unfulfilling and unsatisfying. And what a beautiful, beautiful work that was that He did for us. What great wisdom that is that He did for us. Because He's telling us, He's showing us that satisfaction doesn't come from the things of this world. Salvation is not coming from under the sun. Salvation is coming from beyond the sun. God has done this. This is the image of God that we don't like to lift up, that we don't like to look at, that He causes frustration sometimes to point us to Him. God has given this unhappy search for meaning in this life to point us to Him, and His will not be changed. Kidner says, His world has its own, God's world, has its own obstinate shape which we cannot iron out to our liking. We are driven to face the hiddenness of God's ways. So sin made everything crooked. Verse 15, what is crooked cannot be made straight, and what is lacking cannot be counted. Sin made everything crooked. Life is crooked. Life has gaping holes that wisdom can't figure out. It's frustrating, and we search for fail-safe guarantees and equations, and that's meaningless. Nothing under the sun can fix these inconsistencies. The one other thing that the preacher found out is that his wisdom couldn't figure all this out, and it caused him much vexation and much sorrow. And so Eaton says this, that wisdom has value, but it will fail to solve the problem of life. So, after everything has been said, what does the preacher say? That true meaning is found beyond the sun. Nothing under the sun is going to give us meaning. If we're going to have true meaning, it comes beyond the sun. And so he says in chapter 12, verses 13 and 14, the end of the matter, all has been heard. Fear God and keep His commandments, for this is the whole duty of man. For God will bring every deed into judgment with every secret thing, whether good or evil. So the answer to the meaning of life is not under the sun, but beyond it. It's in knowing and worshiping God. It's in fearing God. It's in saying, God, I know You're there. I fear You. I worship You. I hold You in awe. And I see that You need to interact with my life. And I need to interact with You to have meaning to my life. And so You give me commandments. I obey them. There is a beyond the sun reality that has to affect our under the sun reality. So the answer to the meaning of life is in knowing and worshiping God and obeying Him. Letting Him guide our lives and Him give them meaning. Trusting and following Him when we don't understand the fallen world that we live in is true wisdom. Now, looking outside of Ecclesiastes, we see that life's meaning isn't found under the sun, but here we go. This is a cool preacher thing to do. It's not found under the sun, but it's found in the sun. Not under the S-U-N, but in the S-O-N, right? God doesn't give salvation from things under the sun, and Ecclesiastes intends to drive us to Jesus. Solomon or the preacher, whoever you think this is, Solomon couldn't remove the curse that sin brought to us, that brought meaninglessness to life. Ecclesiastes is crying out for a king who can. Jesus can. And He can restore a relationship to God that was broken by sin. This is the gospel. That Jesus came from beyond the sun to the life under the sun, and He lived the life under the sun, that He could become our sin, that He could become our curse, that He could take on our sin, that He could be punished for our sin on that cross, that He would raise from the dead on the third day, providing the way for us to have a life, a restored relationship with God the Father beyond the sun in this life under the sun. That through Him and through His death and His resurrection for our sin, we might have a restored relationship with God. That Christ, listen, He said it Himself, in this world you will have trouble, but take heart, what? I have overcome the world. I've overcome the world. I've overcome this post-fall world. I've overcome this curse-filled world. I've overcome this world that's full of disease and death and sin and injustice. And you might have to live in it until you're with me forever, but you can live in me while you live under it and in it forever. And you can find meaning for your life under the sun and a life with me forever beyond the sun. I want to read this quote to you from this book. This part of God's story tells us that God will not bring salvation by giving us escape and immunity from the now cursed world. Jesus, too, will highlight this lack of escape throughout His teachings. In this world you'll have tribulation, He assures us. We will have to come to terms with this fact about God. If there is no escape from what is under the sun, then rescue will have to come from somewhere else. The time will come in which God will personally squint and sweat beneath the sun's light and heat. He will enter the gainless world, endure its vanity, and feel the pain of it. In this world you will have tribulation, Jesus will one day say. The poor you will always have with you, He will declare. In that He will sound just like Solomon in Ecclesiastes. But then Jesus will go further than Solomon can. Jesus will stand beneath the sun with us. From there He will look us in the eye and declare what Solomon cannot. But take heart, Jesus will say, I have overcome the world. Jesus makes what can't be new under the sun new. He makes us a new creation in Him to live for the original purpose that we were created for before sin entered the picture. He will rule us and give us true wisdom. With wisdom, His wisdom. He is wisdom itself. He satisfies us with Himself, not the vain, fleeting, absurd things of the world. He will satisfy us now under the sun and forever beyond the sun. So what we're going to find, church, through our study of Ecclesiastes is this. If we read it with no view of anything beyond the sun, you are going to be the most depressed person alive. But if you this is in the wisdom literature for a reason in Scriptures. If you let the wisdom of the preacher drive your hopes and dreams at anything under the sun, giving you meaning, into nothing, you will be at a place in your life fully open to finding meaning in life that can only come from a God who is beyond the sun. That's our journey. The preacher's going to take us on a journey as to things he looked for to find meaning in life. Ultimately to find that they were all vanity and useless. Let's pray. God, thank you for this word, this teaching that is hard, that is different, that is uncomfortable and unsettling. God, it's in your divinely inspired word for a reason, because it points us to the one who gives ultimate meaning to life, who satisfies our deepest longings and our deepest needs. Who becomes for us what nothing in this world can give us. And so we thank you for Jesus. And so as we sing, as we look to the God who is above all, whose wisdom is unsearchable, who we can't completely figure out in every way, but we trust, God, I pray that our hearts will bow in worship and humility to the one beyond the sun that gives meaning to life. And so let's stand and let's just sing together, and let's worship a God who is worthy. And please, after the service, if you'd like to talk to anybody, if you'd like to pray with someone, catch one of us, catch us during the week, we'd love to help you process through some of this truth and what it might be stirring in you, that you might have true meaning in life. So let's stand and let's sing together.